If we were on the icy planet of Gethin in The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin, Shifgrethor would prevent me from giving to you or receiving from you any advice. But luckily, we're not on Gethin, we're on my YouTube channel, so let me openly advise you to read this book, if you haven't yet. This is one of my favorite science fiction novels of all time, right up there with The Dispossessed, which is also by Ursula K. Le Guin, in the same loosely connected series of books called The Heinous Cycle. You don't have to read them in order to fully enjoy them. They're sort of like vignettes from the same universe. Both of these two books have the incredible distinction of winning both of science fiction's highest honors, the Hugo and the Nebula Awards, and for very good reason. I hope one day in our little science fiction book club here we will read The Dispossessed, but for now we're here to talk about Le Guin's most famous novel, which is The Left Hand of Darkness. This video is sponsored, by the way, by my patrons on Patreon. Special thanks to David, Zekum, Thomas, Juan, Frank, Orlando, and Bert. You can sign up for free or to support this book club and everything else on this channel on my Patreon. In The Left Hand of Darkness, we are transported to the icy alien world of Gethin, also known as Winter. We see it mostly through the eyes of protagonist Genli I. Genli is an envoy from a peaceful galactic federation of worlds known as the Ecumen, and he's being sent to Gethin on a first contact mission to win over the trust of world leaders there and convince them to join the Alliance. It's a world of mad kings, spies, propaganda, frenemies, and enemies. The two countries that figure most prominently in the novel, Karhide and Orgoren, are experiencing escalating tensions due to land disputes and bloody forays into each other's territories. This is giving rise to a kind of proto-nationalism, which is the dangerous precursor to war, a concept that Gethin as a world has never known. Oh yeah, and it's a world without fixed gender. Gethenians go through most of their lives without having any kind of identifiable gender or sex, except for a couple of days each month where they enter a period of sexual activity known as Kemer, during which a person will present as either male or female, having no preference or choice in the matter. It's a world where one person could be the mother of one child and the father of another, and where famously, kings can become pregnant. Published in 1969 at a moment where the US was experiencing a lot of cultural fracture along fault lines of gender and race and war, this novel very much feels like it sits in the shadow of the Cold War and at the dawning of second-wave feminism. For instance, it's easy to see the afterimage of the USSR in the bloated, bureaucratic, communist government of Orgoren. And of course, the US's own bloody failed foray into Vietnam was in the background as Le Guin was writing this in the late 60s. But for all the political intrigue, the beautiful prose, the rich themes of allegiance and betrayal, of light and dark, war, philosophy, religion, the feature of this book that gets the most attention and has caused the most controversy is the question of gender. So, let's talk about it. Le Guin wrote in her 1976 essay, Is Gender Necessary?, that the gender fluidity in this book was a heuristic device, a thought experiment. Physicists often do thought experiments, she said. The experiment is performed, the question is asked, in the mind. Einstein's elevator, Schrodinger's cat, my Gethenians are simply a way of thinking. They are questions, not answers. Le Guin wrote this essay in response to her critics, less so the scandalized patriarchs that weren't quite ready to have their ideas of gender questioned. That didn't trouble her so much, and was rather the point. Instead, she was responding mostly to contemporary feminists who were arguing that she didn't go far enough. Some critics felt that her use of he/him pronouns for the Gethenians undercut her vision of a truly non-binary society. And the vaguely bigoted, misogynist protagonist Genli I was sort of serving as dead weight at the center of the novel, getting in the way of the reader really gaining the insights that Le Guin was hoping to impart. And by the way, Le Guin later revised this essay in 1987 as her views continued to evolve, especially on the issue of neopronouns and the singular they pronoun. She also feared that she'd have to revise it again in another 10 years as her views continued to change, and she lamented that she was getting tired of chastising herself. But auditing the ledger of what Le Guin got right or wrong in this novel is less interesting to me than the questions the book is asking. And good questions often outlast their answers. Since she uses physicist thought experiments, I will too. The question of what is time, for instance, has been thought experimented over since, well, the beginning of it, from Aristotle to Newton to Einstein, and we still don't have it quite pinned down. I suspect that what is gender, or more specifically, what is the role that gender should play in our society, is a question that will see many answers shuffle in and out by the end of this century. But it's worth asking, along with so many other questions raised in this novel about the functions of nationalism, or the radical power of empathy, or whether a collective like the Ecumen, or in our world maybe something like the United Nations, is folly, or if it's a worthy enterprise. And I'm not going to try to answer any of those questions myself or at all. Instead, I think I'll pivot now to the full book discussion of The Left Hand of Darkness that I had with my friend and fellow sci-fi enthusiast, Grace Yost. There will be spoilers in this discussion, so if you haven't read this book, pause now and then come back and join us as we trek across the Gathenian ice alongside Genly and Estraven and see what insights and inspirations we can find there. Pack light, wear your best boots, and don't forget the Gitchy Mitchy. All right, here we go. Hello and welcome, Earth. Oh, I see like a dust mote on the camera. A mote of dust, like the Earth.
Oh, what a poetic opening.
The wannabe granddaughter of Carl Sagan over here.
Exactly.
Hello, Earthlings, interstellar travelers, adventurers, readers. Welcome to Elle's Sci-Fi Book Club. I'm Elle Cordova.
I'm Grace Yost.
And we are here discussing this month's book, which is The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. She's one of my favorite sci-fi authors. I'm so excited that we're reading this month. Good choice to our patron voters. Let's dive right in. Yeah, so this is a great segue from our last book, I, Robot by Isaac Asimov, which was kind of from that golden age of science fiction, which is Heinlein, Asimov, Arthur C. Clarke. Very like tech forward, let's go to the stars, solve mathematical problems, hard science fiction, a little bit bro-y.
Right. And we love our bros.
We do.
We're friendly to the bro science fiction.
We are. But it is a nice change of direction to move into the new wave of science fiction, which happened in the 60s, 70s, of which Ursula K. Le Guin was a part. So, yeah, let's talk about sort of the overarching plot, like what happens.
Yeah, so just to bring it to the front of everybody's brains, this is kind of like a first contact mission, meaning there's this alliance of many worlds, and they're trying to reach out to this other planet to see if they want to get involved, to join the alliance.
The Ecumen.
The Ecumen is the alliance, yes.
Yep.
And then the world is Gethin, also known as Winter. And so to do that, rather than having this like overwhelming force show up at the door, which would be alarming and feel like an invasion, they send just one guy over, Genly I, and we're sort of encountering the world of Gethin through his eyes. And of course, the unusual feature, which we'll talk about much more as we get into this conversation, is that I think they use the term ambisexual. So everybody's sort of non-specifically gendered, and then they'll enter a state of Kemmer, and then they can have sexual relations, but then they kind of revert back into their androgynous state. So that's obviously very different, and that causes differences not just in relationships, but the entire planet and the different religions and countries within, they're all sort of different because of that fundamental difference. So we have that basic setup. Genly's trying to get them to be open to this alliance, and it's mostly about, of course, his relationship with Estraven, which we'll talk more about as the conversation goes. So again, just this like really fascinating anthropological literary take on science fiction, as Elle was just saying. And, fundamentally it's just tragic, but it's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah. One of the reasons this novel has survived and is still so celebrated in the 2020s versus when it came out in 1969 is because, it's this amazing thought experiment. Like, what if we were to just remove one aspect of society and see what happens? Like, what's left in a human being when gender is sort of taken out of the equation. But of course, I think for a lot of modern readers, it might not go far enough. It's like there's nothing complicating the idea that sex is gender, gender is sex, and gender is biologically determined in this novel,
Right. I guess the one place where we could maybe see that complicated a little bit is, as people have commented, and I think even there's an afterword, at least in our edition, where the writer who wrote that was commenting on this, is Le Guin's choice of using he pronouns as sort of an unmarked gender pronoun. However, if you read this generously, it's not really quite Le Guin doing that, it's Genly doing that. He is coming in and he's bringing his his gender constructs with him. And so he's sort of mapping his beliefs on gender onto all of the people and then calling everybody he.
Well, so does Estraven in his journals.
Right,
So
I guess
I
that's
don't think
true.
we can totally let the Guin off the hook. I think, but this is something that she has talked about since the publication of this novel in various interviews and essays.
Right.
She's said that she has been bedeviled by this problem of the pronouns, like
Right.
what to use as the universal pronoun. She didn't feel like he really was the right choice. She also tried a story later in the same world where everybody was she. She didn't feel that that was the right choice. They, she felt, was too grammatically problematic and would be too ambiguous, just on the level of language. So, yeah, I think, she would agree that there's something maybe not totally satisfying about the he pronoun, and maybe
Right.
actively harmful or problematic.
Right, yeah. But I still do think that Genli is still bringing his gender constructs in. There's that part, we'll get to it, I think, later, but where he finally realizes, he's like interacting with Estraven and finally realizes like, oh, this person is not just a man, but is also a woman, and I've been like blinkered, and then you realize that most of the story, we do see things from Estraven's point of view, we have myths, but a lot of it is guided through our, like Genli is very present in our minds. And so I think we are getting sort of, Le Guin is sensitive to the way that somebody coming from outside a culture is going to be like funneling everything they see through their own preconceived notions of how people are meant to behave.
Yeah, and it's that moment when Genli finally sees both the masculine and feminine side of Estraven as one. That's the moment where he's able to bridge the divide between them. That's when they become friends and or possibly lovers in some sense, unconsummated sense. But Genli struggles with this the entire novel, and I think we're supposed to be invited to also struggle with him.
Well, and I remember, I don't know about you, like the first time I read this, and maybe the first time people have read this, I realized, like in high school, how everything is passing through my ideas about gender, and then having to realize that it's not just like one character in this book who is androgynous, but everybody except for the people who come down and land at the end. Genli is the only person with like an actual like one gender identity, one sex. Everyone else, you have to constantly, every time you meet a character, you're realizing how quickly you want to assign them into roles. And then I also realized how quickly I was assigning everybody into a male role, probably because of the pronoun thing that we just discussed and the sort of limitations of that. And it really exposes your own worldview.
Yeah, and it also causes that cognitive dissonance when you hear him referring to his landlady as he.
Yes.
So there's this weird blend of, he pronouns, but then feminine descriptions. Also, there's, this novel has been, I think, rightfully criticized for its misogyny. Like, I would say Genli is openly misogynist, and the person who wrote the afterword also agrees.
Yeah. Let me just get her name. I think it was a woman who wrote this.
Charlie
Jane Anders.
Charlie Jane Anders.
Yeah.
Also agrees that he seems to be openly misogynist. He's asked whether women are inferior in his species, and he seems to not really know how to answer. Part of him, I think, wants to say yes. They don't turn up as mathematicians very often, and he's just so phobic of anything that is feminine in Estraven throughout most of the story, and refers to the feminine things as shrill, and just clearly has an issue. And I think we're supposed to be critical of him, though, for that.
Right, I think we're supposed to, in the entire novel, we're supposed to kind of think about our own preconceived notions, absolutely. And then realize with Genli that, I'm not really understanding this person completely. And then I believe it's Estraven who says something like, okay, well, I've been the one person this entire time who's had your back, and you've also been the most mistrustful of me, and he knows the most about Estraven and seems very uncomfortable with, even from the first time when they're at that ceremony, I don't know about this person, they're hard to place, I don't really understand,
Yeah. And I think it's Estraven reaching out, being open from the beginning to form the very connection that Genli has traveled across space to form.
Right.
He wants, this is his mission, is to form a connection this way, to build trust, and ultimately win an ally that will help them join the Ecumen, help the whole world join the Ecumen. So it's like he's opened himself to Genli in a way that no other person on the planet has. But in opening himself, Genli's invited to see something that is disturbing to him.
Yeah,
which is that you can be a whole dynamic person, and they could have this relationship, whether it's a deep friendship or maybe even a romantic relationship, that Genli just is not advanced enough in his ideas of gender to accept.
I love the way that you put that, and I think that gets into some of the religious beliefs of which we can talk about too. But yeah, Estraven emerges as, at least maybe yours too, my favorite character, and I find him like very. I'm just using the pronouns of the text, but
I think
deeply moving.
I think we should probably use the pronouns that Ursula K. Le Guin uses.
I believe so.
I think I could see there being maybe another take on this where we say they,
right?
Because they seemed to me to be a better pronoun.
Sure.
In this case, but since she chose he, we might as well stick to the text.
Right, I think Ursula K. Le Guin, as you have said, is like very receptive to critiques of this text, and I think that's part of why this has been something that people revisit a lot, because it feels very meaningful. It feels like it's making a critique of, hey, what is gender, and in this novel, I don't know, would you say gender and sex? What do you think the relationship between gender and sex is in this novel? I
think, and this is the way that it feels like it was written in 1969. It's gender and sex are kind of the same thing. It's gender is an uncomplicated expression of biological sex. So these people in the novel, that the Gethenians, are not gendered until their sexual organs appear in the time of Kemer. So there's really no complicating of gender identity. You don't have trans people. You don't even have homosexual people. It's just sort of an uncomplicated man versus woman. In some ways, to be fair to Ursula K. Le Guin, she's doing some interesting things with like dark and light.
Absolutely.
Binaries, basically. Left and right hands. So then you have man and woman, and it makes sense. She's working with a binary. It might complicate her thesis a bit to start like queering gender in this, but yeah, I would say it feels of its time in that it feels like second wave feminism.
And maybe like the most radical part of it is that's not so much because, as you point out, that people go into the Kemer state, and then it is just like heterosexuality with the complication of incest being okay in certain ways. But I think their like normal non-Kemer state, that's the like biggest challenge, I think, to contemporary gender norms. I think she does write these characters so they're kind of both at once, and then that is intriguing.
Both at once or neither.
Both at once or neither.
Yeah.
And I think in the book, she references that in their language, they have different pronouns for when somebody is like in Kemer or not in Kemer.
And also animals who are permanently in Kemer.
Oh, I forgot that.
Those have their own pronouns, and they're tempted to use those pronouns for people like Genli or the pervert foreteller, who are always in Kemer, because it's almost like an animalistic state to be in.
Right. The pervert. Yes, exactly. Yeah. I am reminded, of course, as probably a lot of people are, of the work of Judith Butler, not to like get in too far into
gender theory.
Right, gender theory and things like that, because of the idea of performing an androgynous gender role and what that looks like, or Genli reading other people's performances only partially.
And I don't feel we see that a lot in the story. I don't think we see the performance side of it. I think Le Guin has a view, at least in this book, that gender, it comes from sex. There isn't a conscious choice to pick a certain outfit or speak a certain way to perform one's gender. One's gender just comes from the sexual organs being present or not. And I think that's maybe the trouble that a modern reader might have, with this book, is that it doesn't go far enough into the Butlerian territory of performance, because as I think a lot of us believe, gender is it's a performance. It's not necessarily something that just automatically is assigned with your sexual organs. I think maybe this novel would be very different if Le Guin wrote it today. First of all, the pronouns would probably be different. I imagine she'd use they, or she would come up with a neo-pronoun, although she did think about that and decided against it. She said she couldn't stomach neo-pronoun. But yeah, I think I wonder what Judith Butler would say about this novel. I wonder if they've ever written about it anywhere.
Yeah, I do wonder what they would say about it. I think I think it's not necessarily a conscious performance, right? It doesn't have to be conscious for it to be enacted. And so I'm interested in the way that Le Guin has people enacting androgyny. I find that interesting. How is this world being designed with performances of gender that are kind of sit carefully in the middle, which I think she's very adept at doing.
Yeah. I think the other interesting contribution here is when you remove gender from the equation, you get a more peaceful society.
Right.
So there's not really war, although they might be on the brink of discovering war accidentally with these forays getting more violent, and nationalism sort of increasing, at least on the side of, what was it?
Orgurine.
I can never keep that one straight in my mind.
There's a lot of terms in the novel. I can't remember all of them either.
Yeah, Orgurine. It strikes me as more of a bureaucratic oligarchy.
Right. I was wondering if that's like a Cold War reference because it felt very like communist-y. Everyone has to have a job and the government controls a lot of things. It felt maybe...
And then you have the sort of, I guess, constitutional monarchy sort of government with a mad king and Carhide.
Yes.
Yeah, but when you take gender out of the equation, you get a more peaceful society. But then there are two different views about how to run a state.
Right.
And you still get conflict there, and then also there are the sort of two religions that we're able to see in the novel. There's the Handara, and then the Yomesh.
Yeah, religion. Yeah.
We should talk about that because that's really interesting too. And this kind of plays into another thing that I think was interesting about the book is how she structures it with the majority of the chapters are from Genli's point of view. Then we get some myths and some sort of legend. One, I think, sort of field notes.
By one of the investigators?
The original guard that comes through secretly, and the anthropologists, basically, from the Ecumen. And then we also have, obviously, a few different interludes from Estraven in his journal, which are fundamental, I think, to the story. But in the myth-making, the legend portions, we really get to see these two religions. There's the Handara, the Yomesh, and both of them, I think the Yomesh kind of splits, it comes out of Handara. Because
that's my understanding.
Yeah, so in with the Handara, you have the foretellers that are able to see glimpses of the future. You're able to ask them questions. They can kind of give you these answers which are complicated and sometimes lead you astray. Really interesting parables there. Mesh then is one of the foretellers who was asked the question of a really complicated question about what was it?
Was that the meaning of life or something, or what was it?
He was asked some really difficult question, complicated, unanswerable question. Yeah. And then was sort of broken by it. And then had this epiphany and was able to see all of time, all the time. And so then he broke off, founded his own cult, and then most of the people of
Orgurine. It might be Orgurine because it's Estraven, so maybe it's Orgurine. Yeah.
So then most of the people of Orgurine follow that Mesh prophet.
Yes.
And so then they have the Yomesh cult.
Yes. Yeah. Which is interesting, like these two different religions. This one, Yomesh, from Mesh, because there's a singular figure who's there, and I think this is a common interpretation, that religion feels more akin to like Christianity or something.
A monotheistic.
Yeah, where like there's an all-knowing person, this sight, and then you have the Handara who, they do have this practice of foretelling, but Estraven seems, and some of the other people, they're just not really interested in knowing everything. Like ignorance is fine. Remember when Genli goes to a village where there are foretellers, and that's like a fine state to be in.
It's actually a preferable state. That's what we're trying to get to, ignorance, to walk away from unanswerable questions.
Right.
But to me, it feels really Taoist. And I know that Ursula K. Le Guin spent a lot of time studying Taoism. And she even, I think, she translated some Taoist text at some point. Yeah. Which was controversial because she didn't actually speak the language. But anyway, I think there's a lot of inspiration being taken here from the idea of the yin and yang.
Which even literally comes up. Yeah.
Right, exactly. The dark and the light. And she's playing a lot with that in the imagery of the text and then just actually on the surface level of the text. So, yeah, I think the Handara really is influenced by the sort of Eastern ancient philosophy. And then you have the more Christian monotheistic Yomesh.
Yes. Do you think we should read that beautiful poem?
Yeah.
I think I have it here. Oh, it's on page 252.
We have the 50th anniversary edition.
We do. So the poem is, from which, of course, the title comes, "Light is the left hand of darkness, and darkness the right hand of light. Two are one, life and death, lying together like lovers in Kemmer, like hands joined together, like the end and the way."
This comes up so much in the book. Like, even on the ice with the overwhelming light, the absence of shadow becomes dangerous because you need both in order to navigate the harrowing landscape. And then I noticed, like, in Estraven's death scene, there's a lot of play with light and dark. There's, like, remember that scene as he's skiing frantically, and he's a tiny dark figure on a white landscape. He's coming toward Genli. He's trying to escape. He's the one dark figure on the white landscape, and then also there's like streaks of shadows of trees, light and dark, and then the moment that he skis down and is shot, there's again a flash of light from the bullets in the darkness. There's just a lot of the way they lie together feels very yin and yang. Just a lot of play with the light and the dark throughout the novel, and it's been fun to sort of trace it this time. I kind of missed it the first time I read this. But knowing that was a central theme, I was kind of more aware of it. So I started to sort of trace out all of the mentions of it, and it really, like, I think drives home this idea of the binary being one side is not more important than the other. We need a perfect unity between them.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I was struck also by there's one folktale, I think, Estraven the Traitor, where like the idea of like Estraven's motivations being kind of unclear, that could be interpreted in different ways. Zooming out, I think like Genli, from the moment that he recognizes Estraven as a whole person, as being, male, female together, and stops trying to like create this version of Estraven in his head, it feels like from that he kind of gets it more.
Yeah.
And then also I think about Karhide emerges as the place that is more receptive.
Yeah.
Like Orgarin is sort of mired in this kind of infighting between factions. Of course, there's some of that going on in Karhide.
Yeah, I was really struck by that scene where Genli's sort of admiring Orgarin, looking around at these buildings and thinking, wow, this place is so advanced compared to Karhide. Why did I waste 2 years in Karhide? And he's admiring, the fact that they have heat and he's comfortable in his room. And meanwhile, they're actually just better at lying. And they don't trust him any more than the Kurdish people did. In fact, less. And so then suddenly he's in the prison.
Right.
And then it's not until the end when, like you said, he has this moment of realization about both Estraven and Karhide as a whole. They are actually more advanced in this one way of being able to bridge a divide and to see the power of, unity.
And possibly because that's the Handara religion.
Yes.
Embracing both and realizing that you're not going to have every answer all the time. And Genli that's so alien to him.
And actually Shifgrethor?
Shifgrethor. Okay.
That is the reason that he's able to get the Karhide people behind him, because they're more invested in Shifgrethor. So it's like, if you want the prestige of being first and to be part of this alliance, everybody else will follow. And he's right. That's the perfect way to get them involved.
Yeah, and that's a very elusive concept. He kind of understands, but not quite. Just like I kind of understand this novel, but not quite. Like this, rereading it, I'm realizing like a lot of this is just like slightly out of my grasp on everything. And partly it's the way that she's written it so beautifully.
It rewards multiple readings.
It does, yeah. And it's just not all... It's not spelled out for you. A lot of science fiction, they'll immediately tell you that's what this gadget is, or this is why. They don't want you to be wondering what something is for 1 second.
Right.
Whereas Ursula K. Le Guin is happy to let you be kind of like, what is Shifgrethor for a long time?
Yeah, she'll fill in the gaps with these little interludes about, myths and...
And it's an old word for shadow, right?
Yes.
And then it's like...
So we're back to the light and the dark.
Right.
And when you don't trust people, you say that they don't cast a shadow.
Right, yes.
Or their shadow is short if they've lost Shifgrethor, if they've lost, face.
Yes.
Then their shadow has been shortened.
Yeah.
So they think in these terms of like light and dark.
And it's complicated, and things kind of change quickly in the political situation in Karhide. And Genly is Genly isn't, nothing really bad happens to him. They decline him, but they don't go after him, right? And then then you can compare it with what happened when in Orgarin they decline the offer, and then he's in this like miserable work camp being drugged and
taken by the secret police.
Right.
Yeah.
And he's being wined and dined, and he didn't really totally understand the complicated social machinations and political calculations that are going on in response to his presence.
But obviously his whole plight could have been avoided had he trusted Estraven earlier. Because he's just been fighting him from the beginning of the novel, when all along Estraven's been trying to protect him. He ingratiates him with the king to get that audience. It took him 6 months to get that audience. He's trying very hard to play the power structures as he knows them, because he's this seasoned veteran of governance. And then at every turn, Genly is suspecting him, suspicious of him, refusing his advice, and then because of that gets himself into this prison camp. He doesn't see it coming. Estraven actually tries to even warn him. He's like, you're in immediate danger and you need to get out.
Yeah.
And he doesn't listen, and he goes to that dinner, and then the next night he's in that van,
How do you think Genly could have avoided that's very clear. He should have if he brought the ship down right then, they would have had to just deal with it and believe him. What should he have done instead in Karhide with the king?
I don't know that he could have convinced the king without going to Orgarin.
Right.
Because I think the king, this was always going to be an affront to his power. So he needed the threat of Orgarin adopting or getting themselves in with the Ecumen as a loss of Shifgrethor. He needed to be able to see that play out before he was... It's the sink. That happens sometimes. Okay.
Yeah. Like flushing a toilet out to the side.
He needed to be able to see that play out before he moved forward. And
I thought Estraven, I need to reinvestigate the first part of it. So I thought he was trying to hint it's probably not going to go super great at the audience. Yeah. Because he's already aware also that is his name Tybe, the rival, is coming into power.
Yeah, I think Estraven knew from the beginning this was not going to go well, that Karhide might not be ready.
Right.
He was going to do everything he could to try to give Genly the best chance to make his case, but also stay safe.
Right.
In the event that it doesn't work. And I think Estraven is aware that there's this escalating tension between the two countries. He's worried about his country.
Right.
He's worried about the eventuality of war.
Right.
And so he's thinking, well, maybe this is our ticket to resolving our differences. If we need to come together as a planet, as a world to ascend to this, Ecumen, maybe it's worth even just allowing the Orgoda to get there first.
It seems like he's right, because everybody does seem to be on a much better path at the end. And it took him having to, flee, getting Genly into the country and trying to get this, okay, well, this is an option, and then,
And it's really because of Estraven that this planet gets to sort of leapfrog over the war stage of development. So they were on the verge of becoming a warlike world. Now they get to sort of just take a detour and get right to the sort of ascendance of being part of the alliance.
It would be kind of interesting to see Estraven at the beginning, so that I would just like a clearer vision of what's going on in the beginning of the story with Karhide not being receptive to him. I think it's because of Tybe and Estraven's stars falling, and then also just being afraid, the king being like, I don't know if I want to be part of a larger thing. Maybe that will diminish my power, you know.
They keep referring to him as the Mad King.
Yeah.
I didn't really see much evidence of him being mad.
Yeah.
I mean, he certainly is. He is very prideful,
right?
As many
yes.
Kurdish people are. He's concerned with having a child of the flesh, where he produces the child, and he does become pregnant. That's one of my favorite lines in the entire book. The king is pregnant. It's just so like disorienting.
Yes.
And he loses the child, and I mean, you see that side of him. He doesn't seem particularly stable, but he doesn't strike me as mad. But then you have this beautiful characterization of Tybe, with his mouth full of teeth. Like he's this sort of violent, unpredictable person with all these hidden motives, trying to rise in the ranks and take over power. Like he's actually dangerous. You get the sense that the king is just following his pride.
And Estraven knows that that's going to happen.
Yeah.
And realizes in advance this meeting is not going to lead, as Genly thinks. Genly thinks, hey, I'm at the end, right? I've just, and can't believe, like can't understand what's going on, not being able to read the social system until the end of the book, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Another thing I liked about the Guin's writing here is that it's very matter of fact in many ways. There are moments that, like I said in the update for the patrons, that it'll just lyrically take flight. But for the most part, it's very sort of underwrought, and things will just happen matter of factly. Like one moment, Genly is having dinner, and then the next he's suddenly in this absolutely terrifying situation. He's in a van. Somebody is hemorrhaging on him and dying. He's naked and covered in blood. And it's all written just so matter-of-factly, and it happens so quickly. And then he's drugged in the prison, and everything's sort of underwritten. It's like written at a low-grade temperature. And you imagine like all these terrible things are happening, but you're just seeing it through this like very tempered lens.
Oh my gosh, yeah, that's such a good point. I think about that with I think that ending part where Estraven is just like goes skiing away into his death is part of what's devastating. Is it is kind of written like that, and then it was so sad to me. I mean, obviously it's this extremely sad part, but especially because Genly is now aware enough, and he realizes just like a minute too late what's actually going on.
Even if he survives, he's going to go to the voluntary farm.
Right.
You know, he's signing up for a life of either imprisonment and possible drugging, torture, or he's going to die right now.
Right. And he knows by the time they get there, I think he's already like, okay, well, I'm not going to do that. But yeah, I love the way that she writes this. It's on page 3 or 4, all at once there at that last moment, no sooner, I realized what my selfishness and Estraven's silence had kept from me, where he was going and what he was getting into. I said, Therum, wait. Oh gosh, it's like...
He's a moment too late.
Yes.
Well, he wasn't going to listen to him anyway. And I love how he describes, and then he's really gets to ski. You see how beautifully he skis. He just goes, he's graceful, not being held back finally by Genly, which obviously is symbolic in itself.
Yes.
You know, this capable man who probably would have fared better on that ice alone anyway, doing all of this for Genly's benefit, even sacrificing himself and dying for Genly's benefit. And really for not even Genly, I mean, really it's for his own country.
Yeah.
You get the sense that he's a friend, but he's also a patriot. And it's both at the same time. It's hard to say, like, what is the blend? How much is he doing for his world and his country? How much is he doing for his friend?
Right. And it doesn't seem like there's really going to be a future for him. And he's aware of that. That farmer who betrays him, like, offers, like, oh, well, maybe you can stay hidden. And
he can't go back to his homelands. He's banished there.
But then his kid is living there. And I don't think they view him poorly, like the dad. They don't view him that way.
Yeah. I really loved that ending. I love how we end on that kid sort of in spite of himself, just really excited to hear this story. He wants to hear about the other men, the other worlds. What does he say? It's beautifully written. The old Esfens says very calmly, I should like to hear that tale, my lord. Talking about the journey across the ice. But the boy, Therum's son, said, stammering, will you tell us how he died? Will you tell us about the other worlds out among the stars, the other kinds of men, the other lives? which I think bodes really well for the future of Gethin. Because if you have the younger generation taking an interest in the other worlds out in the stars, then maybe this is a planet that will sort of rise to a new height, you know, beyond the little forays between the countries and become a really galactic planet.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you make of this? There's that implication that maybe this society is developed, like that it was some kind of experiment. That's at least what the investigators think.
Yeah, in the field notes chapter.
Yes, yeah.
That's really interesting because I was wondering, so this whole Hainish cycle is founded on the premise of humans are sort of seeded throughout the galaxy on different worlds by the original like colonizers. I don't think it's unreasonable to assume that they would be like, oh, let's tweak this one thing and see what comes of it. But it's hard to say because we don't know a lot about the background here.
This we don't. I'm sure that she, in like other parts of this cycle, explains more of the context. But yeah, here we get like punishingly little, because I was like, mind speech. And it seems, maybe I'm misremembering, but is that an ability that other people came and gave people?
Yeah, I know Genly talks about not having been born with it. He had to be taught.
Right. Something, the last gift, is that kind of what there's something about that. But you can be receptive when somebody speaks to you, then you have the ability. We have that haunting part where Estraven hears
Eric.
Here's Genly speaking in his brother's voice, which may lead us to think that the relationship between them, is it romantic? Is it platonic? It's kind of both and, it seems, you know. There's a worse version of this novel that would be very sensationalist about what would that be like if you fell in love with, blah, 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 blah. And this is like doing a much more insightful version of what it could be.
Yeah, I think, what do we make of Ursula K. Le Guin's, I don't have to say her full name every time.
I keep doing it too.
She has such a lovely name. I always want to say the whole thing. But what do we think of Le Guin's decision to not have them actually, kiss or have sex on the ice? Like instead it's this sort of unspoken, unrealized love.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Would it have been stronger if it is a consummated thing? And then what are the reasons for not making it, for not consummating it? Is that more, would that be too uncomfortable?
And Genly actually confronts this himself. He says something like, I don't know if we were right. Like to bring it further than that would have cheapened the bond or the understanding that we found, bridging our differences. And I don't know if we were right to stay friends. But that's what happened. It's a very nuanced depiction of love.
And who knows what would have happened if, had Estraven not died. And
yeah, there's that moment when Genly's poking around in a village waiting for his time to do the transmitter thing. And he's like feeling the absence of Estraven. He's like, oh, I don't know how to exist without him now. So one wonders if maybe their relationship would have continued to develop. They got sort of like a codependency going on the ice, and I wonder if it would have turned into a more formal relationship later.
Right, and there's a sort of beautiful recognition of the, like, Estraven's precision with calculating exactly how much food they need. The absolute methodical way he goes about building the tent, and everything has to be just so. But then Genly being sort of, stronger and more adept at certain things with the difference in their bodies and things like that. And Genly being more receptive to taking risks, and there's sort of a mutual appreciation. It's very beautifully done. Yeah. Which makes the end just really, it's gut-wrenching. It's really awful.
But it was necessary. It's a noble death, and I think Le Guin earns it, that sacrifice, because without Estraven's sacrifice, and really his whole life is a sacrifice for his country, and then for Genly, and for this better future for his planet. Without that, it just wouldn't be the story that it is. I think she totally earns it.
Absolutely, yeah. And these like understated, devastating passages and.
Hey there, sci-fi book lovers. Elle here, interrupting our conversation briefly to bring you to the Observation Deck. This is a place where people can send in their thoughts, and we might feature them here. This month's observation comes from John S., and I love this because we haven't talked enough about Le Guin's beautiful prose in this novel. The images of distant smoking volcanoes belching fire and meteorites amid a snow and rock-covered terrain are unforgettable, with Genli waxing poetic and calling it magnificent and unspeakable desolation. Buzz Aldrin remarked that the moon was a magnificent desolation on Apollo 11, July 20, 1969. Left Hand of Darkness was published March 1969. Yeah, there's so many beautiful passages. I love that moment when I love the recurring, like, I'm glad I got to live to see this.
Yes.
You know, which is what I think Estraven says when
Yes.
he's looking out at the ice, and then you see it comes back when I think it was Fax.
Yeah, if that's how you say his name, yeah.
He says, I'm glad I got to live to see this, which is, you know, the coming of men from another world. And I don't know, there's a beautiful symmetry to the novel, themes recurring. Nothing seems haphazard or unintentional. Everything seems just so very planned and yet beautiful.
Absolutely. And then also a little elusive. Like, I think I could read this again and then also understand more of everything from the start, because I didn't remember everything that happened that led his meeting with the king to go astray. So I'd love to reread it and think about that again. And
the way she unfurls information.
Yes.
So if you were to read it again immediately, you would see all these things happening that you weren't aware of the first time because you didn't understand them yet.
Yeah. And I also love, you know, as somebody in the humanities, the idea, so this is a science fiction novel that is not really about like hard science things. Obviously it's an anthropological exercise here. Anthropologists, ethnomusicologists, people who study culture, they're going in, they're doing field work, they're looking at myths, things like that. They're talking to people, they're learning languages, and they're understanding things that way. Yeah,
Le Guin, as a daughter of two anthropologists.
Right,
it makes sense that, you know, she would have this background to draw on. And it does feel, like you said, it does feel like something beyond just science fiction. This feels, it has elements of fantasy with the world building and the myth. The myth part of it, and then there's like a historicity about it. Yes. It feels very real.
Right, and so doing something differently. I don't know if you read Ursula K. Le Guin, as we like to.
It feels disrespectful to call her Ursula.
I mean, Ursula.
Although I would have loved to be her friend.
Oh my God, I know.
I feel like you'd have like a really good like glass of wine with Ursula.
Well, yeah, she's really fascinating. I think she has. We were talking about intellectual humility earlier, and the idea of being receptive.
She got a lot of criticism from people in like the 70s, 80s, second wave feminists saying, you know, that her decision to use the he pronoun, and she took a lot of shit really, and was like you said, receptive. At first she was sort of defensive, but then she recognized that defensiveness in herself, and then she kind of came out and said, well, maybe my critics are right. Yeah, well, I don't know. I think I admire that attitude, but I also want to say it is really easy as somebody like who does this. It is so easy to sit on your throne from like 10 or 15, 20 years later and be like, you really should have thought of this. Like, okay, it's very hard to create things. Yeah. You know, for all of the criticisms you can make of this text being very much of its time, not going far enough, you still have to like recognize that if this were written today, even in its current form with no changes, the far right would call this woke.
Of course they would.
You have a black man, Genli's black, right? You know, a black man coming to a planet where gender, like basically a non-binary planet. So I think, you know, you're right. It's really easy to sort of look back at things that were published back in 1969 and think, wow, she was so limited in her understanding of gender. But these are the important steps along the way that must be taken.
I think about that one episode of The Next Generation.
Yeah, Outcast or something like that.
Yeah, I wrote it down. Let me see.
I was thinking about that. In fact, I looked it up to see, was that episode of TNG inspired directly from Left Hand of Darkness? There's no evidence to say either way. But what I did find is that Ursula K. Le Guin was a big fan of The Next Generation. She probably would have been really flattered if it had been. There's she even wrote a whole essay, I think it was in 1994, about why she likes The Next Generation. It really made me happy as a Trek fan.
Okay, well, even more of a reason why we want to have, you know, Ursula K. Le Guin over and drink some wine with her. And yeah, but so this is an episode not to talk ceaselessly about Star Trek, but also to do it. So this is Did we establish, is this 1969? I think it is 1969.
We keep saying that. It's going to become a truth the way that like things do in 1984.
We'll speak it into being. It does say copyright 1969.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a episode of Star Trek The Next Generation. That is, now I don't know the date, but it's season 5, episode 7. It's called The Outcast. And if you're familiar with this, we have the show hunk, who is Commander William Riker. That's fair, right?
Yeah.
Beard hunk.
Yeah. Not my type, but I can see how.
He's the show hunk. I mean, who else would it be, you know?
For me, for my money, I pick Picard.
Picard?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's a bald man, but he knows what he wants.
Well, Picard is everybody. I mean, I absolutely adore Picard, and he did, in fact, become a sex symbol.
Yeah.
With his just like, hey, yeah, I'm bald. What about it? And also, he's an amazing.
What about it?
he's an amazing actor, and he's so compelling. I just love him. But you know, he's like in every Star Trek show. There's a show hunk that is there to be, and not to diminish. I like Riker as a character, but fascinatingly, in this episode, he falls in love with somebody from an androgynous society, and they think about this, and it's still, you know, like the reflections on that episode. Jonathan Frakes, who plays the character, I think, said like, I wish we had gone further.
Yeah. Which,
you know, he seems like a really cool guy.
Lovely man.
Yeah. And he's like, I think we should have pushed it further. We should have had the actor. The actor was sort of presenting as maybe more of a woman, and he wanted to go further. But even then, people were like I think the network, maybe, I don't know this for certain, but the network was a little bit like, what are you guys doing over there? You know, things like that. So things like, you know, this is going to make later explorations possible. And obviously, it's still. Like, that would have been probably in the 90s, I think, when that
92?
aired. Something like that.
Yeah.
And that's still sort of a controversial thing. So, yeah, I think it's important to think, what does this, what doors does this open?
Yeah, amazing to think that, you know, this coming out in basically 1970, you've got more than 20 years later. This is still an uncomfortable thing for people.
Well, and then 50 years later.
Right.
It's still, this is something that people are wondering about. Something people, like we were talking, Judith Butler in like the late 80s and 90s is thinking about what's the relationship between gender and sex.
And now, in our present moment, the people are legislating around bathrooms and all kinds of hand-wringing.
Absolutely red hot issue, maybe even more so now than it was at this time.
Definitely more so now, because there's more conversation about it. And I think when Ursula wrote this, it would have been...
Did you want to say Caleb?
I did. I stopped myself. I was like, no further, this far, no further. But yeah, I think when this book came out, people were obviously talking about gender. There were trans people then, but it just wasn't part of the everyday discussion the way it is now. Right. Now it seems to be... You know, everybody has an opinion about trans people and gender and who should be in what bathrooms and, you know, how should we legislate sports. And these are like the conversations we're having right now. So I think, if anything, this is more relevant now than it was when it came out.
This was really fun to return to. I think the only thing I remembered was the androgynous world and that I really loved the character of Estraven, but I didn't totally remember how it all it's so much more complicated than that, you know?
Yeah, I remember being really frustrated with Genly, and I still was on this read.
Me
but
too.
I understood him a little better on this read, going into it expecting to be angered by him again. So I think I've softened toward him on this read. But I also understand, I think a lot of people in the Discord were frustrated with his limited understanding.
But I think what I really like about this is you're not meant to, because sometimes when you're reading books, there's somebody like that and you're like, oh, I guess that's the hero. I'm supposed to be relating to this person and endorsing all of these limitations and enjoy seeing my own biases reflected in the prose, right? But here, I do think that she's chiseling away at that, and then Genly becomes a much better person and just so much more open-minded and wiser by the end. Absolutely.
In fact, by the end, when he sees his own people coming down off the ship, he's alienated from them. And I don't know if that's an indicator in itself that he's expanded his mind or what it is, but it definitely seems like he's a different person 2 years on than he was when he first came.
Right. And even when he first arrives, He is frustrating. That is totally true. But he has come and he's like carefully learned the languages, and he's not coming in. He's not just like showing up and just like an asshole or something.
No.
But he doesn't understand.
Yeah, he's not gifted with a natural sort of empathy.
No.
I think. So I think they could have sent somebody else that probably would have done a better job.
Well, right. Like navigating the complicated political terrain, and as somebody who seems like incapable of reading a room.
Right.
Like that's a problem.
Yeah, he keeps acting as if it's like these people are actually impossible to understand. Their motives are so mysterious, and it's like, I think maybe you could just open your eyes a little bit more. You have a friend right there who is actually trying to explain it to you.
But then there's this like thing, I can't totally lay out advice, which I think Estraven breaks then when he doesn't want him to die, so he's like, you should take the ship down. He tries to be blunt, and Genly's like, I don't think so.
Yeah. And it takes a lot for Estraven to break Shifgrethor. It goes against everything. It's another device that I think she just masterfully weaves in there, because why wouldn't he just come out and give him all the instructions?
Like at the beginning.
Yeah, why wouldn't Estraven just guide everything the way, because he's powerful, he's a prime minister, he could have made all of this happen. But it's Shifgrethor, which makes it so that he can't actually do that, and that opens up the whole story to us. And now all these layers come out because he's not able to directly do these things. It's really well done.
Yes. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I think like Genly always is thinking that he's on top of things. Like he thinks he has a greater understanding than he does, but Estraven is constantly pointing out how he has no idea what's going on. And one good example of that is Genly doesn't see what's right in front of his face, which is that host, what's his name, like Shuskis. Wow, that's a really hard name for me. Is actually part of the Sarf.
Yeah.
He had no idea, and he was living under the roof of this like Sarf agent.
Who's like completely manipulative.
Yeah.
And instead he's like, oh, I'm finally warm.
Yeah, he's just like a wolf or a sheep, just surrounded by wolves, and Estraven the whole time is just sweating, like, I hope he's okay, He has no idea the danger he's in. And this is why we see things from his point of view, and that's why everything just seems so sudden. Like he'll just suddenly be in the van.
Totally, right.
Yeah.
And then you're like, I think you're like, you're just not aware of what's going on.
Yeah.
So it's very fun to have Estraven's point of view. I'm glad you brought that up, because that's like, I was suspicious of Shuskis. But then when I was like, oh, okay, right, of course, right? And because the Sarf are sort of playing this overpowered role in this is like an extremely complicated government situation, more so than in Karhide.
Oh, way more so, because it's like 33 different factions, and they're all the bureaucracies and secrets everywhere. Everybody's always lying.
Yes.
Nobody's ever just saying what's actually happening.
Right.
People are double agents, and yeah, it's just this like impenetrable fortress of secrecy.
Yes.
And Genly comes in thinking, wow, this place is so much more advanced. Even the architecture is just, it's squat but functional, and he just immediately thinks that he's safe there, and Genly just really has no survival skills. No. Like, even on the ice, his little snotty remark early on when he's like, well, it hardly seems worth hunting those creatures for the stew. And Estraven's like, we need the protein. And then, of course, the next day, he's like, I was twice the hauler that I was. He was right.
Well, I know. Well, that's when I was the angriest at Genly, was after, like, Estraven spends all of the money that he has left, right, to save him. And then he wakes up and is like this little dipshit. Oh, yeah. I probably shouldn't say shit.
Oh,
this little, okay. But, like, you need to thank him right now. You would be dead. You were, like, you were on your way out. Yeah. You were going to die there.
Yeah.
They were just messing around with you and letting you waste away.
Yeah.
And then but then I think he does. Then he undergoes this transformation when we get to the road trip part of the book.
Yeah. Well, overall, would you recommend this to people? Would you read more in the Hainish cycle?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. The Dispossessed, I highly recommend. That's the next one.
That'll go on my list.
Yeah. For the next book in our book club, we are reading The Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler, another classic. So relevant today. with climate change and everything going on, and the fires in Los Angeles, and many other things around the world. So that is for May, and then we're also going to be opening up the polls to our patrons. Philip K. Dick's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep almost won out with the Parable. They ended up being tied, so I just picked the one that reached the final vote first, which was Parable. So if you want to, I'm going to put that one back on the poll. That
seems fair.
Yeah, for June. But a lot of other amazing titles on the poll too, so I don't think it has a sure victory ahead of it. So make sure you vote if you want to vote, and yeah. So Parable of the Sower, let's grab the book, dive in, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.
And that's a wrap on The Left Hand of Darkness. Looking forward to Parable of the Sower next month. We'll see you at the same time right here on the channel, the last Saturday of the month. Thanks again to our patrons on Patreon for making this book club and everything else that I do possible. Keep reading, keep looking up. We'll see you soon.